My name is Riley, and this is the story of how my life took a complete turn, not just once, but twice. I guess it's best to start at the beginning. I was born to two wonderful parents, David and Joanna David, in a cozy, small-town suburb. My dad worked as a journalist and my mom was a nurse. We weren't wealthy, but we had everything we needed to be happy. Life was smooth until I turned 15. Then one night changed everything. It was a rainy Friday evening, and my parents were on their way home from a dinner party. I was with my grandma, watching a silly cartoon when the phone rang. I'll never forget the chill I felt when I heard my grandma crying in the kitchen. The next few days were a blur of confusion and heartbreak. My mom had died instantly in a car accident. My dad survived, but he was badly injured. When I finally saw Dad in the hospital, he looked like a completely different person. His legs were crushed, and the doctors told us he would never walk again. When I held his hand, he whispered, "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'm so sorry." I didn't understand why he was apologizing. It wasn't his fault. Later, I realized he was apologizing for how our lives had changed, for the hard times we'd face, for the mother I had lost, and for the father he thought he could no longer be. But my dad, David, was a lot stronger than he gave himself credit for. Once he got out of the hospital and adjusted to using a wheelchair, he threw himself into his work. He had always been a talented writer, so he put all his energy into his job as an editor for a big newspaper in the city. As I grew older, Dad made sure I had everything I needed. He encouraged me to join clubs, make friends, and live my life as normally as possible. But the truth was, I loved spending time with him the most. We watched old movies, debated over books, and he'd help me with my homework whenever I needed it. When it was time for college, Dad insisted I go away to school. "You need to spread your wings, kiddo," he said. "Don't worry about me. I'll be just fine." I was hesitant, but deep down I knew he was right. So I went to the State University of New York and studied accounting. There I met Emma, who became my best friend. Through her, I met her cousin Michael. Michael is kind, funny, and he didn't hesitate or flinch when I told him about my dad. In fact, when he finally met Dad, they hit it off immediately, bonding over their love of classic rock music. Later, Michael told me, "Your dad is amazing, and you're incredible for all you've done for him." For the first time since my mom's accident, I felt a sense of hope. Maybe I could have a normal life, a life filled with love, laughter, and even a family of my own someday. After graduating, life seemed to fall into place. I got a job at a local tax service, and Michael started working as a long-haul truck driver. We dated for 4 years, and one cool autumn evening in the park where we had our first date, he proposed to me. I was over the moon, but had one condition. "Yes, Michael, but I can't leave my dad. He needs me." Michael smiled and said, "I wouldn't have it any other way. We'll all live together. Your dad's apartment is big enough for the three of us, right?" Our wedding was small and beautiful. Dad insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Standing there with Michael, I felt like I was in a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has its challenges, and mine came in the form of my mother-in-law, Haley, and my sister-in-law, Megan. From the moment I met them, I could tell they didn't approve of me. During our first meeting, Haley asked, with a look of disgust, "So, your father is handicapped?" I corrected her gently, "He's disabled." It was clear from the start that winning them over wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to find a way. This was the beginning of my next chapter, and I had no idea what life had in store for us. I tried to keep calm as I corrected her. "He works as an editor." Haley just gave a quick, dismissive smile and said, "How nice," before turning to Michael with a critical look. "Are you sure about this? There are so many nice girls from good families." I felt my face flush with both embarrassment and anger, but before I could say anything, Michael spoke up firmly. "Mom, Riley is from a good family. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters." Haley went silent, but I could still see the disapproval in her eyes. Her daughter, Megan, followed her lead, and the coldness from both of them was hard to ignore. After the wedding, Michael stayed true to his word and moved in with Dad and me. Our lives settled into a comfortable rhythm. I'd go to work at the tax office, while Michael was out driving long distances, sometimes gone for days. When he was home, we'd enjoy dinner together as a family. But whenever Haley and Megan visited, everything felt different. They acted like they owned our home, barely even acknowledging Dad's presence. One time, I overheard Haley whispering to Megan, "It's such a shame. Michael could have done so much better. Now he's stuck with this girl and her crippled father. And if they have kids, can you imagine the genes?" I felt furious, but held back for Michael's sake. I kept telling myself to keep the peace, but it was wearing me down. One evening, after another tense visit from Haley and Megan, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I broke down in our bedroom, and Michael found me there in tears. He wrapped his arms around me, whispering, "Hey, what's wrong?" I sobbed. "It's your mom and sister. They hate me. They think I'm not good enough for you because of Dad." Michael's face turned serious. "That's ridiculous. You and your dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, it's their problem, not ours." His words gave me comfort, but deep down, I felt this was only the beginning of the tension with Haley and Megan. As the months went by, Michael's trucking business started doing well, and he was on the road more often, sometimes traveling across the country. I missed him when he was gone, but I stayed busy at the tax office and spent my evenings with Dad, who was always there to keep me company. One crisp autumn evening, as I was helping Dad get ready for bed, Michael called. I could hear the excitement in his voice. "Riley, I've been thinking," he said. "How would you feel about buying a townhouse? It would be easier for your dad to move around in his wheelchair, and he could spend more time outside. Plus, you could have a garden, something to keep you busy when I'm on the road." I loved the idea, and when I put the phone on speaker to ask Dad, his eyes lit up. "A garden would be nice," he admitted, "and it would be easier to get outside." With that, the decision was made. In the following weeks, we threw ourselves into house hunting. After a lot of searching, we found the perfect place. A spacious townhouse with wide doorways, a roll-in shower for Dad, and a lovely backyard. Taking out a mortgage was intimidating, but with Michael's income, my job, and the rent from Dad's old apartment, we managed to make it work. We moved in on a beautiful spring Sunday. I'll never forget the look on Dad's face as he wheeled himself onto our new patio. "This is perfect, sweetie," he said, his eyes misty with emotion. "Thank you." Over the next few months, we settled in and made the place feel like home. I started a small vegetable garden, and Dad loved spending time outside, soaking up the sun and fresh air. It was peaceful, almost perfect. To celebrate, we decided to throw a housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, even Haley and Megan. The party was lively and fun until they arrived, fashionably late as usual. They walked in, glancing around with thinly veiled envy. I tried to ignore it, determined to enjoy the day. As we showed them around the house, Haley seemed deep in thought, assessing every detail. When we reached the master bedroom, she turned to me with a sly smile. "You know, Riley," she said in a low voice, "this room would be perfect for Michael and me. Why don't you send your father to a nursing home? Then I could move in here." Her words hit me like a slap. I stood there, stunned, anger rising inside me. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that Dad was my family and that we built this life together. But I took a deep breath and kept my composure. "My father isn't going anywhere, Haley," I said quietly but firmly. "This is his home too." Haley's face twisted with annoyance, but I didn't care. I walked out, leaving her standing there, and joined Michael, who was laughing with Dad in the backyard. Seeing them happy and relaxed reminded me of what truly mattered. Despite Haley's attempts to interfere, I knew I had my family, my dad, my husband, and a life filled with love and strength. And no one, not even Haley, could take that away from me, that I felt like I'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" I managed to say, still in shock. "Oh, don't look so surprised," Haley replied coldly. "Your father isn't well. He's not a whole person anymore, is he? He doesn't need all this luxury. A nursing home would be more than enough for someone in his condition." Before I could even respond, Haley walked straight to the patio, where Dad was chatting with some guests. To my horror, She grabbed the handles of his wheelchair and started pushing him toward the driveway. "Haley's!" I shouted, running after her. "What are you doing?" "If he won't go to a nursing home, he can stay outside," she sneered. "That's what you wanted, right? For him to be outdoors." I was shaking with anger and disbelief. Thankfully, Michael heard the commotion and came running over. His face turned red with fury as he took in the scene. "Mom," he yelled. "What on earth are you doing? Let go of David's chair, right now." Haley looked shocked, caught off guard by Michael's tone. "But honey, I don't want to hear it." Michael cut her off firmly. "You and Megan need to leave. Now." After they left, Michael kept apologizing to both Dad and me. His voice shook as he said, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would do that. I'm just so sorry." Dad reached out and patted Michael's hand gently. "It's not your fault, son," he said kindly. "Some people just can't understand." From that day on, things shifted. Haley and Megan kept their distance, which suited me just fine. Michael focused even more on his job, taking on extra long-haul routes to help pay for a new home. I spent my days balancing work at the tax office, managing our home, and taking care of Dad. For years went by quickly. Life settled into a comfortable, predictable routine. Michael was often away on the road, but when he was home, we were a happy little family. Dad's health remained stable, and he enjoyed spending his days in the garden or working on his editing from home. For a while, it felt like we had found a kind of peace. Then came the call that turned my world upside down. I was at work when my phone rang, and an unfamiliar voice greeted me on the other end. "Mrs. Walker? This is Officer Andrew from the Highway Patrol." My heart sank. "Yes." I could barely get the word out. "I'm so sorry to inform you that your husband, Michael Walker, has been in a serious accident." The rest of the conversation became a blur. Words like head-on collision and didn't make it floated through the air, but they barely registered. I remember numbly thanking the officer and hanging up the phone, the reality slowly sinking in. Michael was gone. The next week was a haze of grief and disbelief. I moved through the motions of planning the funeral as if I were on autopilot, barely understanding what was happening around me. The day before the funeral, I finally worked up the courage to call Haley. I knew she deserved to hear about her son's death from me, not through a newspaper. "Hello," Haley's sharp voice answered. "Haley, it's Riley," I said, my voice trembling. "It's about Michael, he's gone." There was an accident. For a moment, there was silence on the other end. Then Haley's voice returned, but it was filled with fury. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You made him work so hard, driving that truck to pay for your fancy house. You killed my son." I was stunned, unable to process her words. "Haley, Save it," she snapped. "I expect you to give him the best funeral money can buy, but don't expect a penny from us. You made your bed. Now lie in it." And with that, she hung up. I stood there, staring at the phone, tears streaming down my face. How could she be so cruel? How could she blame me for this? I couldn't believe the words I had just heard. The day of Michael's funeral was cold and rainy, matching the heaviness in my heart. The church was packed. Michael had been well-liked, and it seemed like half the town had come to pay their respects. But as I looked around, I noticed that Haley and Megan were nowhere to be seen. They hadn't even shown up for Michael's funeral. Their own son and brother, and they couldn't be bothered. As people lined up to offer their condolences, Dad reached over and squeezed my hand. "It's their loss, sweetie," he whispered. "We're family, and we'll get through this together." After the service, we headed home, feeling the weight of the day. But as we pulled into our driveway, something felt off. The lights were on in the house, which was strange because I was sure I had turned them off before leaving for the church. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach as I parked the car, and Dad and I exchanged worried glances. When we entered, we found the living room in disarray. Drawers were open, and some of our belongings were scattered across the floor. I quickly walked through the house, checking each room, my heart pounding. Then I noticed something crucial was missing. A few of Michael's treasured items that he had inherited from his grandfather, things he cherished. Dad wheeled himself over to me, his expression filled with concern. "Riley, I think this was no ordinary break-in," he said quietly. Just then, a sudden realization hit me. I remembered Haley's harsh words from our phone conversation. Could she have done this out of spite? I was sure I'd turned everything off before we left. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed the lights were on. "Dad, did you leave any lights on?" I asked, frowning. He shook his head. "No, I don't think so." As we got closer, I noticed movement inside the house. My heart started pounding. Were we being robbed on the day of Michael's funeral? I quickly helped Dad out of the car and into his wheelchair, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But as we reached the front door, I heard familiar voices. A chill ran down my spine as I recognized them. I pushed open the door to find Haley and Megan in our living room, surrounded by boxes and pieces of furniture. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, forgetting my grief in the face of this outrageous intrusion. Haley turned to me with a fake, sympathetic smile. "Oh, Riley, dear, we're just helping you pack up. After all, you can't possibly afford to keep this place now that Michael is gone." I was speechless. Megan chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Don't worry. You can go back to your father's apartment. It's cozy." I could feel my anger building. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out of my house right now." Haley actually looked offended. "This house belongs to us now, Riley. All of Michael's property does. We're his family after all." "Like hell you are," I exploded. "Where were you today at his funeral?" "Oh, that's right. You couldn't even bother to show up." Haley waved her hand dismissively. "We were busy making arrangements. Now be a good girl and start packing. We'll meet you out by tomorrow." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These women hadn't shed a single tear for Michael, hadn't even attended his funeral, and now they were trying to take over our home. "I'm calling the police," I said, pulling out my phone. Haley and Megan exchanged worried looks. They clearly hadn't expected me to fight back. "Now, Riley," Haley started, but I cut her off. "No. You have exactly 15 minutes to get out of my house before I call the cops. This is my home. Michael and I bought it together. You have no right to be here." Maybe it was the determination in my voice, or the fire in my eyes, but Haley and Megan finally seemed to realize they had crossed a line. They gathered their things and left, but not before Haley turned to me with a sneer. "This isn't over, Riley. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." The days following Michael's funeral were a blur of grief, anxiety, and endless paperwork. I threw myself into managing Michael's affairs, partly to stay busy, and partly out of fear that Haley and Megan might try to take what didn't belong to them. A week after the funeral, I received a call from a local law firm. My heart pounded as I answered, worried it was Haley making good on her threat. "Mrs. Walker?" A crisp, professional voice greeted me. "This is James from James and Partners. I'm calling about your late husband's will." I felt a flicker of hope. "His will? I didn't know he had one." "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Walker came to see us about 5 months ago. He requested that we contact you in the event of his passing." I scheduled an appointment for the next day, my mind racing. Why hadn't Michael told me about this? What did it mean? The next morning, I wheeled Dad into Mr. James's office. The lawyer greeted us warmly, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Mrs. Walker, Mr. David, thank you for coming. I'm very sorry for your loss." He opened a file on his desk. "As I mentioned, your husband came to see us to draft his will. He was very clear about his wishes." I held my breath as Mr. James began to read. "I, Michael Walker, being of sound mind, do hereby leave all my worldly possessions to my beloved wife, Riley Walker." I gasped, and Dad's grip on my hand tightened. Mr. James continued, "This includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my wish that Riley use these resources to care for herself and her father, David, whom I have come to love as my own." Tears streamed down my face. Even from beyond the grave, Michael was taking care of us. "There's more," Mr. James said gently. He handed me an envelope. "Mr. Walker left a letter for you." With shaking hands, I opened the envelope and began to read. "My dearest Riley, If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm so sorry for leaving you and David. Please know that you both are the best thing that ever happened to me. I made this will because I know how my mother and sister can be. I didn't want to worry you, but I needed to make sure you and David would be protected. I know you'll be strong, Riley. Take care of each other, and remember, I'll always be with you in spirit. Love always, Michael. By the time I finished reading, I was sobbing, holding Dad's hand tightly. Michael had thought of everything to protect us, knowing exactly what Haley and Megan might try to pull. Even though he was gone, he had made sure we would be safe. That night, I felt a renewed sense of strength. Michael's love and planning gave me the courage to face whatever might come. And whatever Haley and Megan tried next, I knew I had a solid foundation and the will to stand firm. I would honor Michael's memory by keeping the home we had built together, holding on to the family and love he had left me. Michael's letter ended with words that cut deep into my heart. You and David are my real family, Riley, not them. Take care of each other, live life to the fullest, and know that I'll always be watching over you both. All my love, Michael. Clutching the letter to my chest, I began to sob, feeling a mixture of pain and gratitude. Dad was teary-eyed too, his weathered hand patting my arm as if to reassure me that we'd get through this together. Mr. James gave us a moment to compose ourselves before speaking again. Mrs. Walker, there's one more thing. Your husband's truck was insured, and under the circumstances of the accident, the insurance company will be paying out the full value of the policy. I looked up, still sniffling, trying to process his words. What does that mean? Mr. James offered a small, reassuring smile. It means you'll be receiving a large sum of money. Enough to pay off your mortgage and more. As we left the lawyer's office, a weight felt lifted from my shoulders. Michael had made sure we would be okay, even in his absence. He'd thought of everything. When we pulled into our driveway, I noticed a familiar car parked on the street. My heart sank as I recognized Haley's sleek sedan. Oh no, I muttered, dreading what could come next. Sure enough, Haley and Megan were waiting on our front porch. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had Michael's letter in my pocket and the strength of his love filling my heart. As we approached, Haley's voice took on a falsely sweet tone. Riley, she began, we need to talk about Michael's estate. I stood tall, meeting her gaze head-on. No, Haley, we don't. Michael left everything to me. It's all legal and official, and do you want to know why? Because we were his real family, not you. I pointed firmly toward the street. Now, please leave. You're trespassing on my property. For once, Haley was speechless. Megan tugged at her arm, whispering urgently, and with one last venomous glare, they finally got in their car and drove away. The weeks that followed were busy as I threw myself into settling Michael's affairs, grateful for the distraction from my grief. The insurance payout arrived just as Mr. James had said, enough to pay off our mortgage with plenty left to spare. One afternoon, while sorting through Michael's desk, I came across a small notebook filled with his familiar handwriting. It was a kind of journal, where he'd written down thoughts and dreams about our future together. One entry caught my eye, thinking about starting a college fund for our future kids. Want to make sure they have the best start in life. My heart clenched as I read those words. We talked about having children someday, but had decided to wait until we were more financially stable. Now, reading Michael's private hopes and dreams, I felt a fresh wave of grief crash over me. Oh, Michael, I whispered, holding the notebook close. We had so many plans. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, haunted by memories and thoughts of the future we'd never have. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Michael. He was there, smiling and holding out his hand to me. It's okay, Riley, he said softly in my dream. Everything's going to be all right. The next morning, I woke up feeling different. I couldn't quite explain it, but something in me had shifted. As I got ready for work, a wave of nausea hit me, and I barely made it to the bathroom in time. At first, I thought it was just the grief taking a toll on me, but as the morning sickness continued in the days that followed, a realization began to dawn on me. Could it be? After a few days, I finally worked up the courage to take a pregnancy test, my heart pounding as I waited for the results. When the two little lines appeared, I covered my mouth in shock, overwhelmed with emotion. I was carrying Michael's child. In that moment, everything changed. I felt a deep sense of peace and purpose, knowing that a part of Michael would live on in our child. I imagined his smile, his kindness, and his dreams continuing through this new life, a gift he had left behind. When I shared the news with Dad, tears filled his eyes. He reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Michael would be so proud," he whispered. "This child will have the best parts of both of you." From then on, I focused on building a future for my baby and honoring Michael's memory in every way I could. I kept his letter and notebook close, a constant reminder of his love and the life we had planned together. And though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, I knew I was not alone. Michael's spirit was with me, guiding me, and our little family would carry on, stronger than ever. I thought it was just the stress and grief, but a small voice in the back of my mind suggested something else. After a week of feeling off, I found myself standing in the pharmacy aisle, staring at the pregnancy tests. My hands were trembling as I picked one up, bought it, and rushed home. The 5 minutes waiting for the result felt like the longest of my life. Finally, I looked down, 2 clear blue lines. I sank to the bathroom floor, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions, joy, fear, grief, and hope all swirling together. "Riley?" Dad's voice came from outside the door. "Everything okay in there?" I opened the door, tears streaming down my face. His expression shifted from concern to alarm. "What's wrong, sweetie?" he asked gently. I held up the test, my hand shaking. "I'm pregnant, Dad." Then I collapsed into his arms, sobbing. He held me close, stroking my hair the way he used to when I was a little girl. "It's okay," he murmured. "It's going to be okay. You're not alone, Riley. And this baby is a gift, a piece of Michael that will live on." His words hit me deeply. This baby was a part of Michael, a continuation of our love. The fear inside me began to fade, replaced by a determination I hadn't felt before. "You're right," I said, wiping my eyes. "This baby is a gift, and we're going to be okay." Dad smiled, his eyes crinkling with warmth. "That's my girl. Now, let's get you something to eat. You're eating for 2 now, after all." As we headed to the kitchen, I felt a glimmer of hope growing inside me. The road ahead would be challenging, but with my father by my side and Michael's child growing within me, I knew we could face anything. As the months passed and my belly grew, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. Dad became my rock, always there with a kind word, a shoulder to lean on, or a helping hand. We settled into a new routine, just the 2 of us, eagerly awaiting the arrival of this new life that would complete our little family. One sunny afternoon, while tending to the garden Dad and I had planted together, I heard a car pull up. My heart sank as I recognized Haley's sleek sedan. What could they possibly want now? I walked to the front of the house, one hand instinctively resting on my swollen belly. Haley and Megan stood on the porch, looking both uncomfortable and slightly desperate. Haley's usual sharpness was missing from her voice as she began, "Riley, we need to talk to you." I raised an eyebrow, staying silent, waiting for her to continue. Megan spoke next, her eyes darting around nervously. "We've hit some hard times. We were wondering if we could stay in your father's old apartment, just until we get back on our feet." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything they'd put us through, they had the nerve to ask for more. I kept my voice calm, but firm. "I'm sorry, but that's not possible. I don't want to have any further communication with either of you." Haley's eyes dropped to my belly, and her face twisted with shock and disgust. "You're pregnant," she spat, her voice dripping with accusation. "Already? You little... I can't believe you've already found a new man. Michael's body isn't even cold, and here you are, carrying some other man's child." A surge of anger flared up, but I swallowed it down. I didn't owe them any explanations, and I certainly didn't want them involved in my child's life. I simply gave a small, secretive smile that seemed to unsettle Haley even more. "My personal life is none of your concern," I said calmly. "Now, I think it's time for you to leave." Haley looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped her. She turned on her heel, grabbing Megan's arm, and they both walked away. I watched as they drove off, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. I had stood my ground, protected my family, and kept my dignity. I knew Michael would have been proud.